So I'm doing this series about how to write fiction that sells, and I'm using this map of how I write fiction, and I'm here at the midpoint. So what's happened, whether or not, this is based on the hero's journey, you don't have to be writing the hero's journey, but even if you're writing something like romance or commercial fiction, it's useful to know these major story points, because even in like any commercial movie or box office fiction, what you're going to see, you're going to start recognizing these points. And so a lot of pantsers, if they don't study plotting, they may write very well. I have friends who are great writers, and they tell a really good story, but they could very easily include some of these points if they knew to include these points. So even if you write your story first, which I wouldn't recommend, or even if you just have a very loose sketch of these major plot points, if you can include these into your story, you don't have to write your story to conform to all these points, but if you recognize that these points really boost the story's emotional impact with your readers, then you can use these in your fiction to write stronger books that sell better. So we're here at the midpoint. A book I really recommend that helped me a lot was Write from the Middle. And the point of Write from the Middle was to figure out this mirror stage. So at the mirror stage, or the midpoint, basically what's happening is your character so far has been reactive. So far they've been forced on this adventure. About halfway through the book, they've been reacting to events that happen to them. So the antagonist keeps putting pressure on them. The allies, there probably is a lot of conflict within their allies and the team that they're trying to assemble to achieve their goals or defeat the antagonist. And they may have goals, they may be agreeing to go forward, but every step they take forward, they take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think that's how it goes. So every time they make a decision and go forward, they get knocked backwards. Something always goes wrong. They can never quite get what they want to get. They keep realizing the strength and the power of the enemy. But generally, the protagonist isn't really calling all the shots. They're making small decisions, but they're seeing a lot of failure and a lot of setback. Everything they try to do comes against more and more conflict. When they get to the midpoint, big things are starting to happen. So it's the first time they really recognize the stakes of the story. And often, like in right to the middle, what they said was, when you get to the middle of most commercial fiction books, there's a scene where the protagonist will be actually looking in the mirror and considering themselves. That's something that a lot of beginner writers put in the first chapter, which I don't recommend. A lot of beginner writers have the protagonist look in the mirror to describe their appearance. That's kind of a cliched tool that I think is pretty weak. I wouldn't recommend doing that. And even at the midpoint, I don't think it has to be a literal mirror. But the idea is, through the story so far, there's been a lot of action, there's been a lot of events. The character has been forced to react to the events by making decisions that further the story or the plot, but they haven't really reflected on the deep considerations like who they are and what they want. They may still be just trying to get home. They may still be trying to, for example, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, the whole book, she just wants to go home. She doesn't really care about the people in Oz. She has her own agenda. She's just trying to get to the wizard to find a way back home. When you get to the midpoint, the character stops being a victim and they become a warrior or a soldier. So it's usually when they decide they're going to stop being reactive. They're going to stop waiting for things to happen. They're going to stop just being defensive all the time. Maybe in a lot of movies, there's this great point, let me see, in Marvel Comics, there's a TV show, I want to call it The Devil, the Diablo, I don't remember. Anyway, there's one Marvel Comics series where he's a blind guy and his costume is kind of a devil, and I can't remember the name, but he refuses to kill people. That's his thing. He refuses to kill people for most of the story, and he wrestles with himself, because if he kills people, he's just like the bad guy. There's no difference between good and evil if the good guys also kill people. So his whole thing is he just wants to arrest people and give them to the police, but the whole Justice Department is is corrupt. The whole system is corrupt. So even though he's catching these bad guys, he's giving them to the police, but they go through a trial and they get out again in a few months, and he has to keep doing it again and again. So even though he's the good guy, even though he has the moral superiority, because the system is so corrupt, he can never actually save the world or save anybody, because he's not solving the actual problems. If he wants to actually solve the problems, he has to go deeper, and he has to revisit the entire, he can't just trust that the justice system is going to work. So he needs to, on the one hand, he needs to go deeper and fix the entire system. You see this a lot in like the Batman movies also, where Batman is he a bad guy or is he a good guy? How far does he have to go down the path to evil, or does he have to become evil to take down the government or the system? Like if the whole system is corrupt, he has to become a villain to bring down the entire system so that there's the possibility of true justice. So that happens a lot in a lot of stories where the character is wrestling with the ethics of what they're trying to do. Maybe they've been resisting something. They really have not wanted to become this person that everyone tells them they need to become. In a lot of young adult, this could be the point where like everyone's telling them they're the chosen one, or they need to become a hunter, or they need to like embrace their destiny, and the protagonist is always resisting. They don't want to do that. They just want to go home. They want to go back to the beginning. At the midpoint, there's a slow point where they're recognizing everything that's happened, they're reflecting over everything that's happened so far in the story, and then make a deliberate choice to change. So they grow, they become a different type of person, they step into the role of who they need to be, even if they promise themselves like it's temporary, or I'm going to go back to becoming someone else. It's really just a shift in thinking. It's not necessarily a shift in action. They don't take action yet, but it's a really big shift where they decide to stop being a reactive victim and they decide to become a warrior. So in some like movies, this is the point where the hero will pick up the gun and shoot the bad guy. And they've been like, through the beginning of the book, they've been showing the protagonist as avoiding guns, refusing to pick up the gun and just fighting and kicking or whatever. But so at the midpoint, they make a choice, they pick up a weapon. It could be something like maybe in the first battle they lost someone, or they realized that the antagonist is really incapable of being reasoned with. Maybe they thought there was an easier solution, a non-violent solution, but at the midpoint they recognize there's only one way they're going to solve all of those problems, and it's usually something they don't want to do. They feel it's morally inexcusable, but they also know that nobody else is going to step up and do the thing, so they have to talk themselves into giving up some of their morals, some of their goals, possibly giving up. So far, they've always just wanted to go back to the beginning. They might recognize that there is really no return. They can't go back to become the person that they want to become. They recognize that they're a different person now. And then they step into their role and they decide they're going to be proactive. They're going to go out and do something to deliberately fight the antagonist. That's what happens in the midpoint. So it's a shift in thinking. There can still be conflict and stuff going on. But yeah, so that's what happens in the midpoint. I'm going to go on to the next video, which is the second pinch point. But I do think this midpoint is one of the most important scenes of a story. So I do recommend you read Right from the Middle, which is a really good book on the midpoint.